Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give everyone a minute or two to get settled, and then we will be getting underway. Okay, I think we'll get ready to get started. Thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion and Q&A, Meet the Press, a discussion with Cornell University Press, Fordham University Press, and Yale University Press. Before I introduce our moderator, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions. So please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there. And I will either pose it to our speaker at the time, or we will save it for the discussion portion of the event today. Today's moderator is Michael Zioli. Michael is a senior advisor for publisher strategy at De Gruyter. Michael has worked in academic libraries, scholarly book distribution, and publishing for more than 25 years. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Michael, who will introduce our speakers. Michael, it's all yours.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. I know we have people from around the world, from China, from Germany, Canada. So we have South America. We have quite an international audience today, as well as our North American compatriots. We have a fantastic panel today, and we've been having discussions over the past week, and I wish we had simply recorded those and could play those back for you today. But we'll try to bring up some of the chestnuts from those chats, and I hope you'll find this interesting. Before I turn this over to our guests, I'd like to just say a few things. First of all, De Gruyter is the host of this. De Gruyter is a German publisher based in Berlin, founded in 1749, and is the original publisher of the Brothers Grimm, which Princeton, by the way, not so long ago came out with a wonderful critical edition of. And De Gruyter is also the publisher of Syntactic Structures, or the Mouton imprint, the famous Chomsky book from 1957. In 2014, 2013, De Gruyter had already launched a digital platform and decided to start hosting other presses as part of that. Harvard was the first partner to that. We have a bunch of partners who just happen to be from the New York area, including Cornell, who's with us today, and Fordham, who's with us today, NYU, Rutgers, and also I'd just like to mention, and John can comment on this in a bit, but Yale had its first office in New York as well and does a lot of publishing around the topic of New York. This is our third Meet the Press meeting. We've had University of Pennsylvania Press, University of California Press, Stanford, University of Chicago Press, Princeton on previously. The purpose of these conversations is to allow an open conversation, if we can get there, and it's hard in a virtual environment, between the presses and university libraries. Although I'll acknowledge that there are more, our audience is more varied than just libraries, but it is the largest part of the audience. And because of intermediaries like EBSCO and YBP Gobi and ProQuest and JSTOR and Project Muse and many others, there's a distance between the press and the consumers of the titles, the libraries in particular. So this is a chance for the presses to talk to you directly, to let the libraries hear about issues that the presses are thinking about. And they're as anxious to engage with you as I hope you are to engage with them. So with that, I'd like to ask each of our guests to give a brief introduction of their press, talk about how old they are, their size. We love to hear about bumps in the road. So if you have any bumps in your road, we would love to hear about those or interesting background bits, the mission of your press. And another thing, we often lump university presses into a basket. It's a university press. But when you get closer, you see it's not a forest. There are a lot of different kinds of trees in there. So I'd like each to talk about some of their strengths and the focus of each. So I think I'll just go in order, alphabetical order. So Jane, would you mind going first?
Happy to. Thank you very much, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to have a conversation about scholarly publishing with multiple players in the ecosystem. It's great to be here with my colleagues, John and Fred, and with you, Michael, and all of the folks on the call. A little bit about Cornell. So I began here, I'm relatively new at Cornell. I began in March of 2020. An interesting time to start a new job. Very interesting fact about Cornell University Press. It was established within a few years of the founding of the university. The university was founded in 1865 and the press in 1869. Co-founder with Ezra Cornell, A.D. White, noted, and I quote, "the need for a press to serve as an internal organ that would provide a publication outlet for scholarly achievements." And the first director of the press was also the first university librarian concurrently. His name was Daniel Willard Fisk. Our mission is to foster a culture of broad and sustained inquiry through the publication of scholarship that is engaged, influential, and of lasting significance. And we have been balancing mission and market ever since. Michael, you asked if there were any bumps in the road. Another fun fact in our history is that while Cornell University Press was the first established university press in the country, it's not the longest continuously operating. That honor goes to Johns Hopkins because by 1884, only 15 years after its founding, Cornell University Press was shut down by the university due to financial difficulties. I'm very happy to see it reopened in 1930 and has had a successful run ever since. Our publishing profile is very broad with lists across the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences with particular strengths in anthropology, sociology, history, law and society, literary and cultural studies, medieval and early modern studies, political science, Asian studies, and New York regional books. So a little bit about regional. We have a newer imprint, the Three Hills imprint, publishes books of general interest about the history, politics, culture, environment, and communities of both New York State and New York City. More established and very well-known imprint is the Ilr Press Imprint. It's been around for about 50 years now, and books on labor and industrial relations, management and human resources, labor history, issues of class, workplace culture, and healthcare policy and practice are published in that imprint. Finally, our Comstock imprint publishes scholarly and general interest books in the life sciences, natural history, environmental studies, and nature writing and field guides. We do about 175 new books annually. We have a staff of 36. We also distribute for a few places. We have brought on a few additional imprints in recent years and added 2 journals. So I think I will now turn this over to one of my colleagues, John or Fred.
And I realized I wasn't clear when I said we'll go alphabetically. That could be by the name of the institution, the press, or it could be by your names, right? I think we'll go alphabetically by institution. So that would be bring up Fordham next.
And Fred, so it's F and F. So I fit that bill pretty well there. Thank you, Michael, and everyone at DeGruyter for coordinating today's event and inviting me to participate. I'm excited to have the opportunity to give an overview of Fordham University Press and how we fit into the scholarly publishing landscape and work with libraries and digital platforms to make our content widely available. Michael asked me to give a little background about myself. I've been in publishing since graduating college many moons ago. I got my start at Wiley in their professional and trade division as a marketing assistant. I moved into scholarly commercial publishing when I became the marketing and sales director for humanities at Routledge. After 6 years, I moved to NYU Press and continued my career in academic publishing at a university press. I went from big international publishing corporations to smaller operations. I loved the mission-driven concept of publishing books based on their contribution to knowledge, offering a platform to underrepresented authors and topics, and diversifying voices and subjects beyond the top sellers that motivate the bigger trade and commercial presses. When the opportunity for a directorship opened at Fordham, I threw my hat in the ring. At Fordham, the press is most definitely mission-driven. Fordham University Press is the 7th oldest university press in the country and the nation's oldest Catholic university press. It was established in 1907 by the dean of Fordham School of Medicine, and The Makers of Modern Medicine was the first book published that same year. All titles published under Dr. Walsh's leadership concern medicine, science, history, and religion. As a Jesuit institution, Fordham is proud to have a prestigious university press that publishes books that align with their well-regarded academic departments like history, philosophy, and religion. We are autonomous, though, and have grown into new areas such as anthropology, race and gender, and urban studies. I like to think of us as a boutique press that publishes interdisciplinary scholarship and regional trade books, offering a partnership to authors. We publish 60 new books a year, mainly dual editions, but will sometimes publish hardcover trade with a later paperback and an occasional original paperback. The university subsidizes the press, but we are expected to cover the cost of producing the books. The university covers office space, salary, and benefits, and legal counsel, among other services. We have a staff of 13 employees, 9 full-time and 2 part-time. We also have 2 graduate student interns from the English department who work at the press for course credits. After the medical school closed in 1922, the press relocated downtown to the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, housed in the Woolworth building. And then from 1947 to 1957, about 10 years, the press published under a university representative by outsourcing production and distribution to a commercial publisher. Currently, we're on Fordham's Lincoln Center campus after many years on the Rose Hill campus in the Bronx. A board of directors consisting of 10 members, all tenured Fordham University professors, govern its program, and I report to the provost of the university. In addition to our well-regarded scholarly list in humanities and social sciences, Fordham Press publishes general interest books focused on New York City and the surrounding area. Since becoming director of Fordham Press in 2009, I've launched 2 imprints, Empire State Editions and Relit New York, each with a unique focus on the history and literature and culture of New York. These titles tend to get mainstream media attention, and publications like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Nation, and similar publications. And the authors are heavily involved in marketing and promotion. The regional trade books typically sell in more significant numbers and help support the more specialized, narrowly focused monographs that are important for disseminating knowledge and bringing us recognition within scholarly communities. Both the academic and regional programs support the mission of Fordham University in teaching the whole person and its connection to New York City. We publish 1 journal, the Joyce Studies Annual. Though most university presses originally published faculty from their parent institutions, this is no longer the case. The majority of Fordham University Press authors are from colleges and universities from across the US and the globe, and non-academics often write the trade books. With that, I'll turn it over to John to give his overview of Yale. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred and Jane and Michael, and it's a pleasure to greet all of you today. On the personal side, I can give you a little bit of my background. I was in graduate school with a part-time job in New York with Grove Press, where I once put Samuel Beckett on hold, one of the highlights of my career. And 2 of the principals of Grove Press left and started a small house called Carroll and Graff Publishers. And it was basically Carroll and Graff and me, which meant that I was doing everything else. And it was great fun and a real learning experience. And when I had finished all my coursework toward the PhD and was about to start the dissertation, when my boss said, "You're going to drive a cab," and this was the year where that was probably the right conclusion, and so I took a kind of gap year and then got hooked on publishing, and came up through in New York publishing in various editorial sales and marketing jobs, where the last job I held was as publisher of Basic Books, which was at the time an imprint of HarperCollins, and then Perseus, and now Hachette, which is the story of a lot of in New York publishing, the gobbling up of imprints. And when I remember talking to the founder of Basic, a guy named Arthur Rosenthal, who was sort of a legend in his day and had begun the imprint as a sort of a psychoanalytic book club. And he had sold Basic to Harper and gone off to run Harvard University Press. And he told me, when Yale comes knocking on your door, listen and go. So when that did happen, I did listen. And I did go. And when I did leave New York and Basic for Yale, I remember Publishers Weekly announced it by saying that I was going from an academic-y trade house to a tradey academic house. And I feel that life in the hyphens like that is an apt description of where we are right now. I'll read a little bit of our mission. The publication of the press are books and other materials that further scholarly investigation, advance interdisciplinary inquiry, stimulate public debate, educate both within and outside the classroom, and enhance cultural life. And I think that last thing about enhancing cultural life and reflecting the cultural life of a university such as Yale, which regularly has interesting non-academic folks come and lecture and teach and deliver special sort of commissioned lectures. And so if Patty Smith comes and does a lecture at Yale, we'll publish that book. And I think that in that way, we reflect the cultural life of the university as well. The background of the university is we were established in 1908 by George Parmley Day. George Parmley Day founded the press, and they lived in a building what is now the New School on 12th Street and Fifth Avenue. And his brother was Clarence Day, by the way, who wrote the big Broadway hit Life with Father. And I guess the university felt so impressed by his fiscal skills in founding a university press that they promoted him to treasurer of the university. So I guess he showed, it doesn't seem to follow in my book, but they seem to think so. In the 100+ years that we've been in existence, we've become one of the larger of the university presses. We're the only, I think, United States UP with a significant editorial sales and marketing office abroad. We have about 80 people in New Haven and about 40 people in London. So fully, 1/3 of our people, 1/3 of our books, and 1/3 of our revenues comes from our London office. And I think this is a big distinction with the press. When I first got here, our wonderful West Coast rep, when I asked the question, how is Yale University Press read by its customers? She says, it's more like you're heard stereophonically with both an American and a continental sensibility, which I always thought was a nice way to put it. We do about 260 new hardcovers a year, but that list pumps up when you factor in all of our distribution partners. We partner with about 25 museum partners all over the world, big and small, including the Yale and Harvard Library museums, the Whitney, the Met, the National Gallery in London, et cetera. So that's a big aspect of our business, and it enhances and aggrandizes our art list, which is, of course, a big part of our program. So we divide the press into a number of imprints. We have our trade list, our trade academic list, our course books, and our art list. And they, depending on the year, vary in terms of their contribution, numbers of titles, and revenues. We have an endowment, which is not as big as some of our peers in the Ivy League. which is something I never forget to remind the administration about. But we do not get an operating budget from Yale. So we have an endowment that covers, depending on the year, somewhere between 8 and 12% of our operating budget. So the rest of everything we do has to be covered by our book sales, which is why I think you see the complexity of kinds of books that we do, where we have to, again, publish trade year books to help subsidize the more academic books that we do publish. So I think that's probably a good place to stop. So thank you.
Thanks to all of you. I thought those were brilliant introductions, and they raised a number of topics that, I have a list of topics I was going to go through, but I see my friend from Tennessee, Charlie Remy, who's actually from Maine, which is where I am right now. But he's put a question in chat that I think is an awfully good one, and it would touch on some of the issues you've raised. For example, some of your trade titles that you publish that subsidize the more scholarly monographs. The fact that you have different imprints, all of you, and they each have a different focus. The question that Charlie asks is, does your press withhold some of its titles from library institutional ebook availability? If so, what kinds and why? I think each of you are going to answer that differently, and it's because of the differing natures of your presses and your lists, what you publish. So if I could, I'd like to start with John Donatich. And by the way, his colleague Stephen Seebeck from Yale also has joined us, somebody I've known a long time and will be participating in this conversation. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, thank you for joining us. So I'm from New Haven myself, so I have this attachment with Yale, and I'm a Jesuit school product, and so have a similar attachment to Fordham. But my question for Yale to start with, you have a very large art list. When I was a kid growing up there, I used to carry groceries out to Joseph and Annie Albers, who are our famous Bauhaus artists and taught at Yale for many, many, many years, among other places. And Yale has published some groundbreaking work of theirs, and has a huge art list, which is fairly unique in the university press world. Those art books must present a lot of issues with rights and digital availability. Can you talk about that, maybe with a little bit of detail? Because what librarians hear typically is, oh, they're images, getting rights for images is problematic. And then the conversation stops. Why is that problematic? And I think we may have somebody on in the group from Getty also who might have some interesting thoughts on images. But John, could you start, and then I'll move to Fred and Jane.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very sticky problem with art books for a number of reasons. First, technically, to reflow books with a very big art program can sometimes be very clumsy. So that's one issue. Secondly, I think permissions and artist estates and getting even high resolutions of images is one of the hardest challenges facing young art historians. I mean, we have, particularly in 20th century and contemporary art, where I think you'll see the trends in art history accelerating. You'll find a young dissertation writer facing up to $25,000 in permissions fees. And if that person is not a tenured faculty somewhere or doesn't have a job yet, they don't have the institutional support to actually help subsidize that kind of program. So it's a real problem for junior scholars, and it's a non-starter for us on the digital realm, because that we're talking about that kind of money just for the print clearance, never mind beyond that for digital. So it's really sometimes impossible for us to even consider putting much of our art list up. That said, we have been thinking a lot about how to contribute a solution to the problem. We're so invested in art history. It's one of our biggest areas of publishing. We felt an obligation to kind of try to find different solutions to it. So we received a $3 million Mellon grant to do something called the Yale Art Portal. And what this is trying to do is basically argue a lot of fair use for books when aggregated into a digital portal, mostly for institutional buyers like libraries. So I'm sure a lot of the people on the call today will know about the Yale Art Portal. We have a number of other presses around the country and the world, in fact, who are hosting content on it, including MIT and Princeton and other art publishers. And this is, we hope, I mean, it's a beginning nascent project. There's only, a couple hundred titles up there right now, but they are influential titles, and some of them are out of print. And we know how quickly, for the same reasons, art books go out of print and are stolen, probably more than other kinds of books. So once a copy is gone from a library, a physical book is gone from a library, it's gone for good. And we're hoping to solve a number of problems with the art portal. One is to make classic art books available digitally. Two, to kind of argue a fair use in rigorous scholarship for digital aggregation through libraries. And three, to hopefully even someday come up with a solution for younger historians to post new content up on the portal. So that's how I would answer that question.
That's terrific, John. Can you just, one other quick follow on to that, and then I'll pass it over to Fred and Jane. What % of your non-art books are available on the academic vendor platforms? And maybe, Stephen, you can talk a little bit too about that.
Very close to full availability outside of the art. We, very, very, very occasionally have, for example, a language textbook, which is not always suitable to those platforms. But other than that, we really view it as an important piece of the mission in terms of our publishing, to make sure that it is available to the full scope. And honestly, if it weren't for many of the arts right to permissions, we would probably love to see the art list similarly represented.
That's interesting. I think there is a perception, and it's historical, right? What you learn from 2012, 2013 kind of sticks with you, and it's that a lot of books aren't available in digital format simultaneously, and it varies very much by publisher. But I know that the Greuter partners typically are close to 100% on some platform, or at least that's the handshake we have between libraries and publishers for the de Gruyter collections. And so we do know that publishers are not withholding much, at least our group. Fred, do you want to talk about content that you may withhold, rights issues, and what % Fordham has available in digital format and on some academic platform? Fred, you're muted.
You think I'd get this after 18 months, right? Yeah, so Fordham is a heavily monograph publishing program. So most of our books, if we have the e-rights, will be digitized and put into these platforms, on these institutional platforms. We want the content as widely available as possible, and our authors want that as well. This is how people do research. Scholars, students, professors, and they want the content available on these platforms, because that's, like I said, that's how they're doing research. That said, we do have a language learning book that came out in the 70s, was reissued in the 90s. It's called Greek, an Intensive Course. We don't even have digital files for that, and we still sell, close to 1,000 copies a year through course adoption. So that's not on the platform. If it's an art book and the author really doesn't want it as an ebook, we may withhold it because it's heavily illustrated. And we do poetry books, the Poets Out Loud series, which is a collaboration with our English department at Fordham, and they award a prize each year, two actually, the main winner and then the runner-up, and we publish the publications, the poetry books. And those are so design heavy, and they the authors really don't want them published as an ebook because it doesn't look the same, because it could be very heavily designed and formatted. And when you put it into an ebook, it looks completely different and it kind of ruins what it is as a I guess an artifact is the right word, but what it is as a book and as a contribution to poetry. So we don't often put those into digital books, but for the most part, and since I've been at Fordham, we've digitized everything simultaneously since 2010 to now. If we have e-rights, we publish it as, it's another format, paper, hardcover, ebook. It's simultaneous and it comes out at the same time.
Let me, Jane, before I go to you with that question, let me just, based on something Fred just brought up, the Poets Out Loud series. I know Yale also probably has maybe the longest standing poets series in the US, Yale Younger Poets. Are there rights issues with those as well that are different from standard monographs, John?
I think it's largely again a design, and I think it's even not only just the look of the page, but the fact that that sometimes if you reflow a poetry text, you're violating the line breaks, which are often very substantive in a poet's vision. So I think that's a real problem. And yeah, the Yale Younger Poets is about 102 years old, I think, right now, and going strong. One of our biggest backlist books is a first book of poetry called Crush by Richard Sykin. It's in our top 20 every week. It's kind of crazy. We love that. And the new winner, Desiree Bailey, has just been nominated and shortlisted as a finalist for the National Book Award. So it's a very good series. We love it. And we also do a lot of poetry in the Margellus translation series, where sometimes there's even facing bilingual pages. So completely disastrous if you try to reflow that.
And I will point out that because some of the library platforms are much more amenable to PDF formatted files, they actually receive a lot of our poetry that would never be viable on a retail platform. So it's one of those places where the academic market actually has a leg up on the retailers of the world.
Yeah, good point.
Excellent. Boy, there are a lot of topics here, but I want to move on to Jane to get Cornell's perspective on what % of their list is available on one or another academic platform, and talk about issues with content that is withheld for whatever reason.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we've got somewhere north of 5,000 total books on the backlist, active in print, as we still call it, in print books. And about 3,500 of those are available digitally. And interestingly, what's fascinating too is listening to the reasons why different presses do what they do. Here at Cornell, we withhold nothing from the library digital collections. And that was a philosophical decision made by my predecessor, who had come from Project Muse and believed that all of the material should be available. Different people in-house have different opinions about that. And in my own background at SUNY Press, we withheld books that we thought would do very well in course adoption markets. And after SUNY, I went to Northwestern. Northwestern has a fantastic poetry list. We withheld the poetry for some of the same reasons that were just discussed. So sometimes it's because we hope not to lose revenue. Sometimes it's because of production issues. Sometimes it's because of rights issues. But here at Cornell, we put everything we've got the rights for into our digital collections.
Wonderful. So the bottom line is, if it's not a special class of book like art books, typically it's available. And all of you are saying it's close to 100%, if not 100%. I think I'd like to swing now to something that we're also, to the cloud we're still living under, which is COVID. We've known for a long time, as we hear every year, library budgets are being cut. I think that's been true since I've been working in this for 30 years. But I've been hearing the same thing on the press side. That is, fewer and fewer copies of books are sold every year. And so there's the issue of sustainability. We've seen presses threaten. The University Press of Kentucky was almost shut down. University of Missouri Press, Stanford University Press famously was almost shut down 2 or 3 years ago, I think. Wilfrid Laurier University Press, the University of New England Press was shut down. So I'm interested to hear about you had talked about funding sources, subsidies, et cetera. How is your sustainability and your business? What's the health of your business here after a year and a half of COVID? And what were the trends? What has been the trend in this past year? If you can give us a little bit of insight into how you're doing. Let me start with Jane this time and work the other way around.
Thanks. I'm really happy to report Cornell had a very strong year last year. I think a lot of university presses were surprised and pleased by how well we did over across fiscal 21. I will say that one of the interesting data points was that our print sales were down considerably, but our digital were up sort of exponentially, which made the difference. And we ended up, we had a really lean budget. We budgeted smartly, in my opinion, and came out ahead. So happy about that. I had one other thing to say about that. What was it? Oh, you were asking about sustainability and the model. Yeah, so as a new director, I'm excited about doing all sorts of new things, and you know, walking into a new situation during a global pandemic is not exactly the time to say, please invest in the press. I have many things I would love to invest in. So at the moment, though, we're just holding steady state, and we're a little different from both Yale and Fordham. We are a big Ilr Press. We're not small, but we're not huge, and we have to cover about north of 90% of our operating costs through sales of our books. So sustainability is on my mind always, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but what I'm excited about is the fact that readers are finding our work and that we're reaching, you know, ever broader markets thanks to the many digital platforms that we're on, and people are buying the books. So that's good news.
Great. Thank you, Jane. Fred, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, Michael, thanks. Yeah, like Jane and Cornell, we had a really good year. In our fiscal year ended in June. So we were about 10% over projections, which is great. You know, early days of COVID were scary. You know, in March, April 2020, we saw a dip in print sales, and some of our big books, lead books, were coming out, and we had author events that were canceled, and we hadn't yet pivoted to like the online Zoom events and all that. So we're really finding our footing. How are we going to deal with the pandemic? And then we kind of got into the groove, and we started doing more events for our lead books digitally. We saw an uptick in print sales, and then digital sales really took off. And we were in a couple programs, a lot of them actually, for making content open for a few months in the early days of COVID. And I think that was a great way to help libraries, our own library included, to help students who are on working, learning remotely and making the content available. And I think that actually was a really good thing for us to do for a university press, and to be a good citizen and a good partner. And then, De Gruyter is one of our newer digital platform partners, and that has been great for expanding our content. So 2021 was great, and we're hoping 2022 continues that trend. Sustainability is always on my mind, and I think I mentioned this to Michael in one of our prep talks. I've had the same boss for 12 years since I've been here, which is very unique to university press world. We've had the same president, the same provost, academic VP actually. The president just announced that he's stepping down in June of 2022. So that makes me nervous, because what does that mean? Will the new president be a Jesuit? Will which is unlikely because there's not a lot out there, a lot of Jesuits out there. Will he or she support a press? We've been very supported, and so will that continue? So these are some of the concerns that I have, because we don't have a big endowment. We're very reliant on the subsidy of the university. So we're unique. I've worked at other university presses, and the subsidies haven't been that large. They've been smaller. So that's a concern of mine. But we do have a very strong network of faculty on campus that like us. Our board is very supportive. They've even said to the administration and the board of trustees, Fordham publishes authors that we couldn't even get as faculty, which is a pretty amazing statement to say. So hopefully, that support continues. And what I'm doing is, as a director, is being an advocate. I'm continuing to advocate for the press, and then doing things like digital platforms and making our content available supports that advocacy.
Hey, thanks, Fred. I have questions both for John and Stephen on this topic. John, why don't I start with you and let you just address that question, and then I have something for Stephen.
Okay. Well, happily, we can report similar results to my colleagues. We had, I think, our best top line year in 5 years, our best bottom line year in 10 years. And this first quarter, we're up 29% from that. So that feels very solid. And our print sales were actually up, as well as our digital, and the backlist really kicked in. I think all of our major bestsellers of the past year were backlist, which found their way in the retail world in a big way. So that was very, very welcome. As far as sustainability goes, I think we are, having to be, as Jane said, 90+% responsible for covering costs. I think it sort of, we're used to the pressure of that, and I think have accommodated it well. In boom years, we've been able to take our surplus and invest it into Yale's endowment for the press. So we've actually grown the endowment, which has been great because that gets better every year. I'm also very active in fundraising, and have probably raised about $17 million in restricted funds for various publishing programs. So that's a big aspect of my job. I think you're muted, Mike.
Yeah, can I slip in one quick question, because it's come up twice on the chat? Just a quick answer if you have it at your fingertips. And either you or Stephen, I don't know who would know this. What percentage of Yale's art list is in digital format?
Single digit.
Single digit.
Yeah, really small. Yeah, okay. And but growing. I mean, the art portal is our vote on how to make that happen. And as I said, it's nascent days, but we're hoping that it gets to buy in, and that other publishers join in, and it becomes a sustainable thing in and of itself.
Okay, so here is my my next question, and it brings in a few threads. So John, you said your print sales were up, but you also mentioned that Yale has a large trade list, and maybe we should define what trade is versus academic. But Jane, you said your print is way down, and I can tell you from the De Gruyter perspective, print was way down because we're primarily an academic scholarly list. There isn't much trade stuff there. But digital was way up. I think what you have in common, all of you, is that from a digital perspective, having nearly 100% of your stuff on the digital platforms, it was ready to be accessed. And I know on the library side, between hybrid learning, which grew a lot under COVID, and distance learning, which has been growing anyway, even those areas that have been reticent to adopt ebooks, maybe like classics, where professors like the print books, have been forced to move to digital access. I guess I'd like to ask, what percentage of your businesses, if you know it, and you may not because the intermediaries kind of keep that data, but what percentage of your business is academic library? And I think that will be varied a lot by your list. I'm going to put a little preface in there. About 10 years ago, I met Stephen for the first time. Maybe it was a little less than that. Maybe it was 8 years ago. But I thought I was the big YBP guy, and we're the big seller for university press content, and I'm the big honcho. Welcome me into your publishing house. Well, Stephen brought me quietly into his office, showed me a pie chart, and the YBP part of the Yale sales was the tiniest sliver. Now, as John has pointed out to me, it's an important part of the pie, but it was still a sliver, and it stuck with me all these years. And thanks, Stephen, for sharing data that maybe at the time you probably shouldn't have shown to me, but it stuck with me, and it gave me a lot of perspective. So what percentage of your sales are academic? I'd be curious, and I think our audience would like to know. Stephen, why don't you start responding to that?
Sure. Overall, our academic library sales are probably in the neighborhood of about 13%. Obviously, it varies year by year, and that's broken out, between digital and the print sales into those markets as well. I did a little bit of deeper digging, and on our academic list, the books that we don't really envision as having sort of a primary trade life, that gets closer to 20% in terms of their market share.
And of course, it's tougher to measure the print life of those books because the libraries are sourcing from various indirect sources.
Yeah, that is just sales that we're able to see and definitively identify as library. So yeah, it is understated.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that even if it's in our surveys, it varies a lot by press, but the average is probably somewhere 20 to 30% for most UPs, but it can be up to 70 for some and down to 10 for others. But I know from my background in business that 20% is significant, and you couldn't carry forward your business if you were suddenly to lose 20%. So it shouldn't sound like a small number. It's actually a very big, important, decisive number. Fred, do you want to take a crack at that? What percent of your business is academic library?
Sure, Michael. When you asked me this question, in preparation for this session, I kind of did some research, and it turns out that 41% of our overall sales come from institutional platforms for ebooks, which was more than I expected. And for print, it's less than 1% of their overall budget, from what I could tell. Because like you said, they're sourced from different places, but a significant portion of our sales do come from these digital books sold to the institutional platforms.
And the print, then you're saying that the print is not typically an academic library, that's going to other.
Well, no, those are the sales that are going, the print sales going to academic libraries. I mean, they've decreased so much over the years. I've been in publishing a long time, and I've seen where you could sell 1,000 copies to libraries, and then it was 500. Then it went to 200 was the sweet spot. Now it's like 75 or 50, of a dual edition. So it's really, I think, they're buying the books digitally, and that's the way patrons are wanting the content, obviously. So we're giving them what they want, I guess, right?
Right.
And what percentage, Fred, is digital of overall of sales?
What was that, John?
Your percentage of digital sales to your overall revenues. Do you know that?
Yes. Yeah. It was quite higher than I expected, actually. When I looked at all the different platforms, DeGruyter, Muse, JSTOR, we're an Upsell, and some of the other platforms. It's fairly significant when you add them all together.
Okay. Jane, how about you?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear this variability because I was a little alarmed when I got the answer back from our director of sales and marketing, who said, and I quote, "Our trackable percentage of sales direct to libraries is less than 1%. That is not including aggregators, of course. That is somewhere in the neighborhood of what Stephen mentioned, in the teens of overall revenue. he says he also can't break down the percentage of books sold through wholesalers and Amazon, of course, to libraries. So it's really tricky to track. And one of the things we wish we had more capacity for in-house is doing precisely this sort of data analysis, because as you said, Michael, if you know where your content is going, you can hopefully make smarter decisions about, increasing the odds that you can get more of it to various places. And so that is actually one of our goals in the coming year, to try to get a little more insight and visibility into those channels.
We'll talk more about that. But for now, let me change to a different topic. Textbooks, right? So I know that typically academic libraries have said forever, we don't collect textbooks. But that's changed in recent years, and they're starting to, because textbooks have gotten so expensive and students can't afford them. So somewhere in a library budget, I don't know where the money would come from exactly, there often is some part of it to support some textbook purchasing. However, that said, the big textbook players, we know who they are. It's Vital Source, Core Text, Bibliu, Red Shelf, and those typically are sales that are made through the bookstore to the students. So they don't go through the library. And I can say that for the longest time, publishers have not been putting their true textbooks, not course adoptions, but true textbooks onto the aggregator platforms, because they depend on a lot of revenue from a true textbook. And if you put one on an aggregator platform, you can wipe out all of the sales, which supports your mission, but it doesn't support you financially. So can you tell us a little bit about textbooks and what you're doing to, what you do with textbooks? Anything? John, do you want to start? And
Sure.
Stephen, also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as Stephen said, we don't have a gigantic textbook program. We have a discrete program in language instruction, and those are withheld mostly because they are very complex in their parts. So it's a program that includes audio, and so it's a difficult thing to aggregate digitally. There are workbooks that you have to mark in by pen, and so it's a very difficult thing to translate into a digital aggregation. Our higher level course books, which is by far the dominant kind of course material that we use, is largely on the aggregator platforms. So, and as Fred mentioned, when the pandemic broke out, we also put all our books on open source content to be available for students.
Thanks, John. Stephen, anything you'd like to add in there?
No, I think that hits the nail on the head.
Okay. Fred, can I pass it over to you?
Yeah, Michael, we don't really do a lot of textbooks. We do a lot of what you call the supplemental books, books that would be recommended in courses. A lot of them are really, upper level graduate or upper level undergraduate. We don't do like pure textbooks. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the one Greek, which is kind of an outlier for us. And that's not on the platform. On the platforms, it's just really just print only. But other than that, most of our books are available. So I'm not really probably the right person to answer that question, because we don't really do textbooks per se.
Thanks, Fred. There are a couple of presses I can think of. University of Hawaii Press has a famous series, a textbook series on Korean, which they don't put on platforms. Georgetown University Press, a great press, does what are called the critical languages. So you'll find Chinese and Farsi and things like that. Wolof, which I wanted to ask you about, Fred, but we'll get to that maybe in the next 3 minutes. But there aren't too many university presses that are doing what are called real textbooks. And so this isn't a huge issue for most. Jane, how about you?
Yeah, same thing. We don't do what are classically defined as textbooks, and we put everything
Can I bridge from there, because John mentioned interactive pieces. Do you see a growth in interest from authors in doing works that are interactive? That is, you would have the standard text piece with links to other pieces. And is that a growing area, a growing challenge? Comments? Fred, do you want to start this time?
Sure. Yeah. We recently were reviewing a project that actually came through the New School, a series that they do, and we're open to opportunities like that, where we're partnering with another institution to do these kind of interactive books. Brown University is also doing something, and I've met with the director of that program. So we don't have the infrastructure at a press the size of Fordham to develop a whole program on interactive books. But if someone came to us and we can serve as a partner in that role, where they would have the imprimatur of a university press, our built-in marketing and sales, and we could give them the platform, but we don't really have that kind of infrastructure to set it up. But we're willing to partner with places like the New School or Brown.
Jane?
We started to get those questions in my last couple of years at Northwestern. The lists were different. Northwestern had a terrific list in theater and drama studies, performance studies, poetry. And I think some of those authors had interests beyond just text on a page. I have not heard it come up here at Cornell. So I think it has to do with, what primary lists one publishes.
Okay, and John and Stephen, it seems to me with your art list, you have the Joseph Albers app for the iPad and your portal. It seems to me that maybe you're already doing some of this. What does it look like from your perspectives?
Yeah, the app was very interesting. It was a bear to produce, and we had to get funding for it. And we're not set up to do something so different. So we felt that there was a real challenge to make. Once made, I think it did very well. It won awards. It sold quite well, though it did not backlist, interestingly. And the portal right now is building some capacity for incremental publishing, the kind of iterative course book that might happen over time, and that whose text is perhaps unstable and changeable. That's kind of interesting to me. But I feel I once wrote a paper on why books still matter, and it felt to me that this enterprise that we're involved in that actually puts so much effort into researching and developing, and that the book marks the end of a thought experiment, and a kind of finitude in argument making, and then gets socialized again in marketing and readership and picked apart. We had one author who did exactly that, started writing a book on free speech, but invited all his readers from his column in The Guardian to kind of interact with him and actually tangle with the argument a bit. And that was very useful to him, but not really relevant to the finished product. The finished product absorbed all that interactivity. But it was still important for him to mark the end of the thought experiment with a book. And then the book gets socialized and argued with and tangled with. But I think our place in that food chain is finishing the thought experiment.
And just to add on to that, I think the interactive elements also pose unique challenges because they require us to work in areas that we don't normally work. We're publishers with strengths in helping create that final statement on the work from the author, but then the interactivity requires ongoing technical maintenance and technical expertise that we just simply don't have as part of our our organizational DNA. We've found that with some of our augmented ebook experiments and, language ancillaries where, even if we hire in an outside partner to help with those elements, very often those outside partners phase out a piece of a project or go out of business. And, we're back to square one in having to relearn a whole new place or find a new partner.
Well, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I think that partnerships are vital, and kind of recognizing and respecting each other's lane, that there's a lot of knowledge that goes into these. I have two quotes that I pulled together that I thought might be an interesting way to bring this to a close. Ellen Farron was the previous director of MIT Press. And she also had an MBA from Harvard. So she knew a lot about business and not just about publishing. And she was quoted saying, "I like doing things that are impossible, and there's nothing more impossible than university press publishing." Mm-hmm. That was pretty funny. And a lot of truth in that. And there's one from Peter Doherty, who was the previous director of Princeton University Press. And this is about respect and kind of recognizing how much goes into what each of us do in our sectors. He wrote, "I know what an art it is to publish scholarly books, to attract them, to build a list, to get them edited, to present them to an editorial board, to design them, to get them reviewed, to do all the things you need to do, which is to help inform a discussion and a conversation," which is what I hope we've done very briefly today for our audience, and enjoyed with each other as well. So thank you very much for your time. Our hour is up, and that was one of the fastest hours I've ever spent. And I'm sorry, half our list of questions went unanswered. Caitlin?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it looks like we've covered a lot of the questions. If we've missed any in the chat, we will reach out to you directly with an answer. And we just wanted to thank everyone. We appreciate you being here. You will receive the recording and information about trialing university press content at your institution via email after the event today. So thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Great, thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks all.